Before we continue, please tell us where in the world are you tuning in from? Let us know in the comments below. Adrian Vance lived in a fortress of glass and steel that pierced the sky, a penthouse that was both a monument to his success and the symbol of his gilded cage. From his custom-built wheelchair, the city sprawled beneath him, a glittering tapestry of lives he could influence with a single phone call, but never truly touch. He was the CEO of Vance Industries, a titan of technology, a man whose name was a synonym for power. Yet, every morning, he woke up a prisoner, not just of the paralysis that had claimed his legs 5 years ago, but of a silence that was far more profound. It was the silence left by his twin brother, Ethan. They had been two halves of a single soul, their bond forged in the crucible of a difficult childhood, their dreams entwined like the roots of an ancient oak. But 5 years ago, after a bitter argument that had ripped a chasm between them, Ethan had vanished. Adrian's accident had followed soon after, a cruel twist of fate that had left him with a broken body and a shattered heart, believing his brother had abandoned him in his darkest hour. The grief had calcified over the years, encasing his heart in ice. He became ruthlessly efficient, a machine of logic and profit, because emotions were a luxury he could no longer afford. On a bleak Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the sky weeps a cold, relentless rain, Adrian was returning from a sterile board meeting. The usual route was blocked, a snarl of traffic forcing his driver, a quiet and loyal man named George, to take a detour through the city's forgotten arteries. The gleaming limousine, a vessel from another world, slid through streets lined with pawn shops and weary faces. Adrian stared out, his expression as gray as the weather, seeing nothing but the blur of his own reflection. And then, he saw him. Standing on a corner, drenched and shivering, holding a soggy piece of cardboard with the word anything scrawled on it. The man's hair was matted, his face etched with hardship, but the eyes were Ethan's. It was a punch to the gut, a lightning strike that cracked through the 5 years of ice. The world slowed, the sound of the rain fading to a dull roar in his ears. It was him. Older, broken, but unmistakably his twin. His other half. A wave of nausea and disbelief washed over Adrian. He felt the phantom sensation of his legs wanting to stand, to run, to burst from the car and close the impossible distance. His voice was a choked whisper. He told George, "Stop the car. Now." George, startled by the raw emotion in his employer's voice, immediately pulled over. But the city was a merciless current. In the precious seconds it took for George to navigate to the curb, a bus hissed to a stop, obscuring their view. When it pulled away, the corner was empty. The man was gone, swallowed by the indifferent crowd, a ghost in the rain. Adrian stared at the vacant spot, his heart hammering against his ribs. A single, hot tear escaped and traced a path down his cheek, a stark contrast to the cold mask he wore for the world. Was it real? Or was his grief finally fracturing his mind? The question echoed in the cavernous silence of his soul, and for the first time in 5 years, the titan of industry felt utterly, terrifyingly small. The fortress had been breached, not by a corporate rival, but by a ghost from a life he thought was buried forever. The man he had just seen wasn't just a beggar on a street corner, he was a mirror reflecting a past filled with love, a present filled with agonizing questions, and a future that had suddenly become an unbearable unknown. The image of his brother, hollowed out by hardship and begging on a street corner, was burned onto the back of Adrian's eyelids. Sleep offered no escape, it only replayed the scene in a torturous loop, each time more vivid, each time more damning. He would see Ethan's face, not as the vibrant, laughing young man from his memories, but as the ghost in the rain, and he would wake up with a silent scream caught in his throat. The meticulously ordered world he had built for himself crumbled into chaos. He cancelled his meetings, ignored the frantic calls from his board, and shut out the world. The polished glass of his penthouse no longer reflected a powerful CEO, it reflected a haunted man, a brother consumed by a sudden, terrifying hope. He had spent 5 years convincing himself that Ethan had left out of spite, that his brother had chosen anger over family. It was a narrative that, while painful, was at least contained. But the sight of Ethan, so utterly broken, shattered that narrative. Spiteful men did not end up on street corners, their eyes filled with a despair so deep it looked like an abyss. Something else had happened. Something terrible. Adrian's mind raced back to their last fight. It had been about the company, about a deal with a man named Marcus Thorne, a charismatic mentor who had taken them under his wing. Ethan hadn't trusted Marcus. He'd called him a shark, a predator hiding behind a charming smile. Adrian, blinded by ambition, had defended Marcus, accusing Ethan of being jealous and paranoid. The words they had exchanged were like acid, dissolving the very foundation of their bond. "He'll destroy you, Adrian. He'll destroy everything we've built." Ethan had shouted, his face pale with conviction. Adrian had shot back, "The only one destroying anything is you, with this baseless paranoia." Ethan had walked out that day, and Adrian had never seen him again. Until now. The memory, once a source of bitter resentment, now felt like a prophecy. Adrian's blood ran cold. He had to know. He could not live another day in the prison of his own assumptions. He did what powerful men do when faced with the unknown: he hired the best. He called a private investigator, a man named Miller, known for his discretion and his unnerving ability to find needles in entire cities of haystacks. Miller was a professional, all cold facts and detached analysis. He listened to Adrian's story, his face impassive, as Adrian described the man on the corner, the location, the look in his eyes. He saw the tremor in the CEO's hands, the desperate hope warring with years of hardened grief. Miller was professionally skeptical. He said, "Mr. Vance, it's a big city. Grief can play tricks on the mind. Faces can look familiar." But Adrian was resolute. "Find him," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I don't care what it costs. I need to know if it was him." As Miller left, the silence in the penthouse returned, but it was different now. It was no longer empty, it was filled with the deafening hum of possibility. The seed of doubt planted by that fleeting glimpse of his brother was beginning to sprout, its roots cracking the foundations of the cold, lonely life he had accepted as his reality. The search for Ethan became Adrian's sole reason for being, a desperate quest for a truth he was terrified to uncover. It was a penance, a prayer, a last, desperate attempt to bridge the chasm that had opened up between them all those years ago. The private investigator, Miller, was as good as his reputation suggested. After a week of combing through the city's underbelly, of talking to outreach workers and shelter volunteers, a lead emerged. It was fragile, a whisper in the cacophony of urban life, but it was a start. The man Adrian had seen was known in the transient community not as Ethan, but as Eli. He was a phantom, a quiet man who kept to himself, moving through the shadows of the city with a young daughter who was his entire world. They were often seen at a small, unassuming soup kitchen in the city's industrial district, a place called the Harbor. It was run by a woman named Clara, a social worker whose reputation for fierce compassion was as well known in those circles as Adrian's for ruthless business was in his. The news hit Adrian with the force of a physical blow. A daughter. His brother, his lost brother, had a child. A niece he never knew existed. The very concept was so overwhelming, it was hard to breathe. Against the strenuous objections of his personal assistant and the cautious advice of his security team, Adrian made a decision. He had to see for himself. He couldn't delegate this. He couldn't look at another black-and-white photo or read another sterile report. He needed to see with his own eyes. George, his ever-silent driver, navigated the limousine through the familiar, polished avenues of wealth and into the unfamiliar, cracked streets of poverty. The car, a symbol of obscene luxury, felt like an invading vessel here. They parked across the street from the harbor. It was a humble brick building, its paint peeling, but a warm, yellow light emanated from its windows, a beacon against the encroaching twilight. And then Adrian saw him. Ethan. He was standing in the queue that snaked out the door, his shoulders slumped with a weariness that seemed bone-deep. He was holding the hand of a small girl, no older than 7, with wide, curious eyes and a mop of dark hair so much like his own. The sight stole the air from Adrian's lungs. He watched as Ethan bent down and whispered something to the little girl, a gentle smile briefly erasing the hardship from his face. He saw his brother, the man he thought had abandoned him to a life of anger and resentment, performing an act of such tender, paternal love that it shattered the last remnants of Adrian's icy facade. His heart, which he had believed to be a dead, useless organ, ached with a pain so profound it was almost sweet. This was real. This was his brother. And that was his niece. He wanted to scream, to have George carry him out of the car, to cross the street and pull them both into an embrace. But he was paralyzed, not by his injury, but by the sheer, crushing weight of the moment. What would he even say? How could he possibly explain the last 5 years, the towering walls of misunderstanding that stood between them? While Adrian was lost in his turmoil, a woman emerged from the soup kitchen, a clipboard in her hand. She had a kind face, but her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. She noticed the out-of-place limousine immediately, and the intense, pained stare of the man in the back seat. This was Clara. She watched for a moment, her expression a mixture of caution and concern, a gatekeeper to the vulnerable souls she protected. She saw the man in the car wasn't looking with idle curiosity, he was looking with a lifetime of longing. Adrian watched, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrest of his chair, as Ethan and the little girl, Lily, finally made it inside. Through the large front window of the soup kitchen, he could see them at a small table. He saw Ethan take his own bread roll and carefully place it on Lily's plate, pretending he wasn't hungry. The gesture was so achingly familiar. Ethan had always been the selfless one, the protector. The years melted away, and for a fleeting second, Adrian was a boy again, watching his twin brother give him the last cookie from the jar, claiming he didn't like them anyway. A lump formed in his throat, thick and heavy with unspoken apologies. Just as he was drowning in the memory, the scene was shattered. A large, brutish man approached Ethan's table. His voice, though muffled by the glass, was clearly aggressive. He loomed over Ethan, jabbing a finger towards him. Ethan's body tensed, instinctively shielding Lily, who shrank back against him, her small face filled with fear. The man was a lone shark, a predator who fed on the desperation of others. He was demanding money, making threats, his cruelty a stark, ugly stain in the warm, safe space of the shelter. This was the moment of injustice. This was the raw, visceral proof of the hell his brother was living. Adrian's powerlessness was a physical agony. He was a king trapped in a tower, watching a dragon attack his family in the village below. But his kingdom was not just of brick and mortar, it was of influence and wealth. A cold fire ignited in his chest. He would not stand by. He turned to his driver, his voice low and dangerous. "George," he said, the man in the leather jacket. "I want you to go in there. Give him whatever he's asking for, and double it. Then you will inform him, in no uncertain terms, that if he ever comes near that man or his daughter again, he will discover what it's like to have his entire life systematically dismantled. Am I clear?" George, who had served Adrian for years and had never seen this side of him, simply nodded. "Perfectly, sir." He exited the car, his large frame a stark contrast to the rough but ultimately petty cruelty of the lone shark. George handled it with quiet, brutal efficiency. A thick envelope of cash exchanged hands, followed by a few whispered words that made the color drain from the bully's face. The man stammered an apology and scurried away, casting a terrified glance back at the gleaming black car. Ethan stared after him, his expression a storm of confusion, suspicion, and profound relief. He looked around, searching for an explanation, his eyes eventually landing on the limousine across the street. Clara had seen the entire exchange. She had been on her way to intervene herself, but the sudden appearance of the imposing stranger from the luxury car had stopped her. Now, her professional curiosity and her protective instincts were at war. She marched out of the soup kitchen, her jaw set, and walked directly towards the car, a small, determined figure walking into the lion's den. She tapped firmly on the tinted window, her gaze unwavering. The moment of truth was at hand. Adrian took a deep, steadying breath and pressed the button to lower the glass, ready to face the keeper of his brother's world. The tinted window slid down with a soft, expensive hum, revealing Adrian's face to Clara for the first time. She had been expecting arrogance, perhaps a condescending smirk, the look of a wealthy man amusing himself with the lives of the less fortunate. Instead, she saw eyes filled with a sorrow so deep it startled her. There were lines of pain etched around his mouth, and a vulnerability that was completely at odds with the opulent vehicle he sat in. "Can I help you?" Adrian asked, his voice strained, guarded. Clara did not flinch. Her own gaze was direct, her voice steady. "You just did," she replied, nodding towards the soup kitchen. "But I need to ask why. We don't get many guardian angels in $500,000 cars around here." Her tone wasn't accusatory, but it was probing. She was testing him. Adrian was taken aback by her forthrightness. He had expected to be dismissed or perhaps thanked effusively, but not challenged. He respected it. "I saw a man in trouble. I helped," he said simply, offering a sliver of the truth. "That man is Eli," Clara said, her voice softening slightly as she spoke of him. "And the little girl is Lily. They're good people. They've just been through a lot." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw past the CEO, past the wheelchair, to the man underneath. "You look like you've been through a lot, too." The observation was so direct, so personal, it disarmed him. For the first time in years, someone was seeing him, not his name or his net worth. "I'm Adrian," he said, the name feeling strange on his own tongue in this cant. A new, strange rhythm established itself in Adrian's life. His days were no longer just a sterile succession of meetings and market analyses. Now, they were punctuated by clandestine visits to the gritty industrial district. He would have George park the car in the same spot, a silent sentinel watching over the humble brick building of the harbor. From this distance, he became a secret spectator to his brother's life. He saw Ethan, or Eli, as he was known here, begin to lose some of the deep-seated tension in his shoulders. With the threat of the loan shark gone and the guarantee of a safe place to sleep, a small measure of peace seemed to settle over him. Adrian learned, through his daily check-in calls with Clara, that Ethan was a gifted artist. He would spend his quiet hours sketching portraits of the other residents on scraps of cardboard and napkins, capturing their hidden dignity with a few deft strokes of a charcoal nub. It was a talent they had shared as boys, spending hours filling notebooks with drawings of fantasy worlds and superheroes. The knowledge that Ethan still had that part of him alive, that it hadn't been completely extinguished by hardship, filled Adrian with a profound sense of relief. In a move that felt both bold and terrifyingly intimate, Adrian arranged for a large, anonymous donation of high-quality art supplies to be delivered to the harbor. A few days later, he watched from his car as Clara presented Ethan with a new set of sketch pads and professional-grade pencils. He saw the look of utter disbelief on his brother's face, the way he ran his fingers over the smooth paper as if it were a holy relic. And then he saw Ethan smile, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes, and Adrian felt it in his own chest, a corresponding warmth spreading through him. His focus, however, was often drawn to the small, vibrant girl who was his niece. He watched Lily play in the small, fenced-in yard behind the shelter. He saw her boundless energy, her easy laughter. He saw how she would run to her father and throw her arms around his legs, and how Ethan would scoop her up, his face buried in her hair, the love between them a palpable force. This little girl, this bright spark of life, was the reason his brother had endured. For the first time in years, Adrian found himself smiling without realizing it. The calls with Clara became the anchor of his days. Their conversations drifted from the logistics of the shelter to more personal territory. He found himself telling her about the accident, not the cold, clinical details, but the crushing loneliness that followed, the feeling of being entombed in his own life. She listened with an empathy that wasn't pitying, but strengthening. In turn, Clara shared parts of her own story. She told him about a past relationship with a wealthy, charismatic man who had promised to help fund her first community project, only to use it as a tax write-off and abandon it, and her, when it no longer served his public image. "I learned that sometimes the biggest monsters don't look like monsters at all," she had said quietly. They were two people from different worlds, both wounded by betrayal, who were finding an unexpected solace in one another's company. A found family was beginning to take shape, with Adrian, the distant benefactor, Clara, the compassionate link, and Ethan and Lily, the unknowing heart of it all. One afternoon, Clara approached his car, holding a piece of paper. "This is for you," she said, passing it through the window. It was a child's drawing, rendered in bright, waxy crayon. It depicted a big, black car and inside, a stick figure with a sad-looking face. At the bottom, in shaky letters, it said "The Sad Man." Clara explained. Lily drew it. She said she feels sorry for the sad man who watches from his car all day. She wanted you to have it. Adrian stared at the drawing, his vision blurring. This small gesture from a child he had never met, his own flesh and blood, had pierced through layers of armor he didn't even know he still had. He was no longer just a CEO or a benefactor. To this little girl, he was simply the sad man, a person worthy of her innocent compassion. He carefully placed the drawing on the seat beside him, a sacred totem in his sterile, empty car. The drawing wasn't just a picture, it was a mirror, and for the first time, Adrian truly saw the man he had become. While Adrian was finding a fragile new purpose in his secret vigil, his private investigator was digging deeper. Miller was a dog with a bone, and the inconsistencies surrounding Ethan Vance's disappearance had gnawed at him. He had started with old company records, tax filings, and legal disputes from 5 years ago, a digital ghost hunt through the archives of Vance Industries. A week after Adrian had started his anonymous support of the harbor, Miller called. His voice was grim. "Mr. Vance, we need to meet. In person. What I've found, it's not something I can discuss over the phone." The ominous tone sent a chill down Adrian's spine. He agreed immediately. Miller arrived at the penthouse, his usual professional detachment replaced by a somber gravity. He laid out a folder on Adrian's large glass desk. "It's worse than we thought," Miller began, his words precise and devastating. "Your brother didn't just disappear. He was pushed." The file contained evidence that Miller had painstakingly unearthed. Financial records showing large sums of money being funneled out of a subsidiary account, with the digital trail expertly falsified to point directly to Ethan Vance. It was a classic embezzlement frame-up, clean and vicious. Ethan had been ruined, his name and reputation destroyed. He would have faced decades in prison, Miller stated flatly. He had no choice but to run. Adrian stared at the documents, his mind refusing to process the words. Framed? Ethan, the most honest person he had ever known? It was impossible. But the evidence was there, cold and irrefutable. And then Miller delivered the final, crushing blow. "The man who orchestrated the frame-up," he said, tapping a name on a document. "The man who benefited the most from your brother's removal. Marcus Thorne." The name hit Adrian like a physical assault. Marcus. Their mentor. His closest advisor. The man who had comforted him after his fight with Ethan, who had assured him Ethan would come to his senses. The man who had stepped in to become his right hand after the accident. The world tilted on its axis. Every interaction, every piece of advice from Marcus over the last 5 years was suddenly cast in a sinister new light. But Miller wasn't finished. "There's more," he said, his voice dropping lower. "I had a contact look into the police report from your car accident. It was officially ruled as mechanical failure. But I had him dig up the original evidence logs from the impound lot. The brake lines weren't just worn, Mr. Vance. They were cut. Cleanly. It was made to look like an accident, but it was attempted murder." The silence in the room was absolute. The rain from that long ago day seemed to be falling inside the penthouse. The fight. The frame-up. The accident. It all clicked into place, a horrifying, perfect timeline of betrayal. Ethan hadn't abandoned him. He had been a victim. And Adrian's paralysis, it wasn't fate. It was a failed assassination. Ethan had tried to warn him. "He'll destroy you," he had screamed. And Adrian had called him paranoid. The truth, in its full, monstrous scope, descended upon Adrian. It was a weight so immense it threatened to crush him. The grief he had carried for 5 years was instantly transmuted into something else, something white-hot and terrifying: rage. A cold, clear, calculating fury. The man on the street corner wasn't a ghost of his past, he was a living testament to a lie that had stolen both their lives. The brother Adrian had mourned was not a traitor. He was a survivor. And the man Adrian had trusted with his life had tried to take it, and had succeeded in taking his brother's. He was no longer just the sad man in the car. He was a king who had just discovered the identity of the serpent in his court. The rage that filled Adrian was a clarifying fire, burning away years of apathy and grief. There was no more room for passive observation. The time for watching from a distance was over. He had to reclaim his brother. He had to mend the world that Marcus Thorne had so gleefully broken. His first call was to Clara. His voice was different, stripped of its usual guarded tone, now humming with a quiet, steely intensity. "Clara, I need your help," he said. "I need to talk to him. To Eli. It's more important than I can possibly explain." Clara heard the change in him immediately. This wasn't the request of a curious benefactor, it was the plea of a man on the edge of a precipice. Trusting her instincts, which had told her from the beginning that this was something deeper, she agreed. She suggested the community center in the evening, after the dinner rush, when the space would be quiet and private. She told Ethan that the anonymous donor wanted to meet him, to discuss a potential job opportunity, perhaps something involving his art. Ethan was hesitant, his life had taught him to be suspicious of good fortune. But he trusted Clara, and the hope of providing a better life for Lily was a powerful motivator. He agreed. That evening, George drove Adrian to the harbor. Instead of parking across the street, they pulled up directly in front. George helped Adrian into his chair, and for the first time, Adrian crossed the threshold into the world he had only been observing. Clara met them at the door, her expression a mixture of anxiety and hope. She led him to a small, quiet room at the back of the center. And then, Ethan walked in. He stopped dead in the doorway, his eyes locking with Adrian's. The name Eli dissolved in an instant. The carefully constructed walls of his hidden life crumbled to dust. His face, weathered by years of hardship, seemed to crumple, and a storm of emotions, shock, fear, pain, and a flicker of long-buried love, passed across it. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, two halves of a whole, separated by a chasm of lies and lost time. The man in the expensive suit, confined to a chair, and the man in worn clothes, standing free but broken in a different way. Adrian broke the silence, his voice thick with a pain he could no longer conceal. "Ethan," he breathed. The name was a key, unlocking a room in his heart that had been sealed for 5 years. "It's me." Ethan flinched, taking an involuntary step back. "Adrian? What, how?" Adrian pushed his chair forward slowly, his hands trembling on the wheels. "I know," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry, Ethan. I know everything." He didn't wait for a response. The words poured out of him, a torrent of confession and revelation. He told Ethan about the frame-up, about Marcus, about the tampered brakes and the accident that was meant to kill him. "I thought you hated me," Adrian choked out, the tears he had suppressed for so long finally breaking free. "I thought you left me. But you were protecting me. All this time, you were just trying to protect me." Ethan listened, his own face wet with silent tears. The confusion and fear in his eyes slowly gave way to a dawning, heartbreaking understanding. When Adrian finished, Ethan finally spoke, his voice raspy from disuse and emotion. He told his story. He explained how after the frame-up, he had tried to reach Adrian to warn him, but Marcus had intercepted him. Marcus had shown him pictures of his pregnant wife, Sarah, threatening to harm her if Ethan ever spoke a word. So he ran. He took Sarah and they disappeared, living in fear, always looking over their shoulder. Sarah had passed away from an illness a few years later, an illness they couldn't afford to properly treat. He was left alone with Lily, too ashamed to resurface, too terrified that Marcus's reach was still long, and convinced that Adrian, the powerful CEO, believed the lies and despised him. The two brothers, separated by a lie, were finally united in the truth. Adrian reached out a hand, and Ethan rushed forward, collapsing to his knees beside the wheelchair. He took his brother's hand, and the two men wept, not for the years they had lost, but for the brother they had finally found again. The reunion with Ethan was not just a healing balm, it was a declaration of war. The cold, calculating mind that had built a corporate empire was now focused on a single objective, the complete and utter destruction of Marcus Thorne. Adrian was no longer just a CEO, he was an avenger, fighting for the life that was stolen from his brother and the mobility that was stolen from him. He moved with breathtaking speed and precision. He brought in Miller and his own team of cutthroat corporate lawyers, laying out the entire sordid story. The mission was not just to expose Marcus, but to dismantle his life with the same methodical cruelty Marcus had used on Ethan. It was to be a masterclass in poetic justice. Miller's evidence of the frame-up and the attempted murder was the foundation. Adrian's legal team began building the case, quietly, meticulously, ensuring every piece was ironclad. But Adrian knew that a legal battle could take years. Marcus needed to be tried in the court of public opinion first. He used his immense influence in the media, a power he had always wielded with careful detachment, and turned it into a weapon. He anonymously leaked the story, not all at once, but in a series of devastating blows. First came the story of corporate espionage, of a rising star named Ethan Vance who was professionally destroyed by a rival. Then came the whispers of financial crimes, of shell companies and laundered money, all traced back to Marcus's vast holdings. Finally, the crescendo, the explosive revelation of the tampered brakes, the attempted murder of Adrian Vance, tying the entire narrative together in a horrifying bow. The story was a sensation. Marcus Thorne, the celebrated business visionary, was unmasked as a monster. His company's stock plummeted. His board of directors deserted him. His life, built on a foundation of lies and ruthlessness, crumbled into dust in a matter of days. The final image the world saw of Marcus was of him being led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of disbelief and rage, a perfect mirror of the cruelty he had embodied for so long. His defeat was total, his punishment absolute. While the storm of Marcus's downfall raged in the headlines, Adrian was quietly rebuilding his brother's world. The first step was to erase Eli forever. He moved Ethan and Lily out of the shelter and into a beautiful, light-filled house just a few blocks from his own penthouse. It had a large, green yard for Lily to play in and, most importantly, a spacious, sunlit room that Adrian had converted into a state-of-the-art art studio. He filled it with every kind of canvas, paint, and pencil imaginable. He hired the best doctors to address the years of neglect Ethan's health had suffered. For Lily, he hired tutors and arranged for her to be enrolled in the best school in the city. He was not just giving them money, he was giving them back the life that had been stolen. He watched as the weary, haunted look in Ethan's eyes was slowly replaced by a spark of his old self. In the sanctuary of his new studio, Ethan's hidden talent, once confined to crumpled napkins, exploded onto the canvas. He painted with a feverish intensity, pouring out the pain, the fear, and the darkness of the past 5 years. But he also painted the light, Lily's laughing face, the kindness in Clara's eyes, the tearful reunion with his brother. His art was raw, powerful, and breathtakingly honest. A gallery owner, a friend of Adrian's, saw the work and was stunned. A show was arranged. On opening night, the art world was captivated. Ethan Vance, the lost artist, had been found. His work was hailed as a masterpiece of survival and hope. The virtuous underdog's hidden talent was finally revealed, and the world celebrated him. The dust settled, and a new world bloomed in its place. The name Marcus Thorne became a cautionary tale, a ghost of corporate greed. The name Vance, however, was redefined. It was no longer just a symbol of power and wealth, but one of resilience, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond of family. Ethan was no longer the phantom Eli. He was Ethan Vance, a celebrated artist, a man whose work spoke of the profound depths of human suffering and the astonishing heights of its capacity for hope. He stood tall, his dignity restored, the shadows of the past finally chased away by the bright light of his new reality. He was, most importantly, a father who could now give his daughter the world she deserved. Lily blossomed. The small, timid girl who had shrunk from the world now ran through it with laughter and confidence. She adored her father, but she also formed an incredible bond with her uncle. Adrian, who had never imagined himself as a family man, found an entirely new dimension of joy in her presence. She would climb onto his lap in his wheelchair and they would spend hours together, she, telling him fantastical stories, and he, listening with an attention he had once reserved only for stock market reports. She was the moral compass who had guided them all back to shore. The chasm between the twin brothers was gone, filled in with shared forgiveness and a renewed, stronger love. They were different men now, shaped by their separate ordeals. Adrian, once cold and isolated, had learned the value of connection. Ethan, once broken by the world, had learned to trust in it again. They were two sides of the same coin, one forged in fire, the other in ice, now finally reunited and whole. And the found family, born from a chance sighting on a rainy day, found its final, crucial piece. The friendship between Adrian and Clara, which had been the bridge between two worlds, slowly, naturally, deepened into something more. In Clara, Adrian found a partner who saw past his chair and his wealth, to the man he was. In Adrian, Clara found a man whose capacity for love and loyalty was as vast as his fortune, healing the old wounds of her past. One evening, as the sun set over the city, casting a golden glow over the park where Lily was playing, Adrian turned to Clara. There was no grand gesture, no ostentatious display. He simply took her hand. "Clara," he began, his voice filled with a sincere, quiet emotion. "You taught me how to feel again. You saw me when I was invisible. You, Ethan, and Lily, you are my family. You are my home." He then asked her to marry him, not as a CEO making a merger, but as a man, whole and healed, asking the woman he loved to build a future with him. Her answer was a tearful, joyful yes. The final scene of their story was not one of corporate triumph or artistic acclaim, but one of simple, profound happiness. It was Christmas Eve, a year after Adrian had first seen his brother on that cold street corner. They were all gathered in Adrian's penthouse, the once sterile space now filled with the warmth of family, the sound of Lily's laughter, the smell of a Christmas tree. Adrian, Clara, Ethan, and Lily. A family built not from traditional ties, but from the stronger bonds of kindness, forgiveness, and second chances. They were a testament to the story's enduring lesson, that no matter how broken life may seem, no matter how deep the darkness, a single act of compassion can be the spark that ignites a new dawn. For those who choose love, there is always a way back to the light. What did you think of Adrian's story? This story teaches us that true wealth is not measured in dollars, but in the love we share and the compassion we show to others. It reminds us that forgiveness has the power to heal the deepest wounds and that it's never too late to mend broken bonds. Have you ever experienced a moment that completely changed your perspective on life? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience could be the inspiration someone else needs to see today. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to Soul Lift Stories and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that hope is never truly lost. Thank you for being a part of our community.